You ever wonder why you feel off, even when life looks fine? Like you're functioning, but not really living. Motivated one day, numb the next. Confident in your head, but quiet in the room. Most people think it's a personality flaw, that they're just not built right. But what if it's not you? What if it's the environment you've been shaped by? In this video, we'll explore how your surroundings, growing up and right now, silently shaped your thoughts, emotions, even your identity. And through Carl Jung's insights, we'll unpack how to stop blaming yourself for what you had to become to survive. Because sometimes the change you're looking for starts with understanding what shaped you. You weren't quiet by nature. You were taught it was safer not to speak. You weren't lazy. Your environment drained your will to move. You weren't unmotivated. You were overwhelmed by expectations that made effort feel useless. Most of what you hate about yourself didn't come from you. It came from where you had to survive. Carl Jung believed the psyche bends to protect itself. When the world feels unsafe, the mind doesn't ask what's true. It asks what works. So you learn. You adapt. You suppress. You build masks to belong. You make yourself smaller to avoid the heat of conflict. You become agreeable to avoid abandonment. You stop expressing joy, anger, curiosity because someone once told you it was too much. And years later you call it a personality. But what if it's not? What if the things you blame yourself for are actually defense mechanisms? What if your procrastination is just your nervous system going into shutdown from chronic pressure? What if your lack of confidence is not a flaw, but a response to growing up around people who mocked, ignored, or minimized you? This isn't about blaming your past, it's about seeing clearly. Because clarity is what breaks the cycle. You keep trying to fix yourself when there's nothing broken. You keep searching for motivation when your system is in survival mode. And you keep punishing yourself for not blooming in conditions where nothing healthy could grow. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Jung said that because he knew the truth most of us avoid. What works for someone else might be poison to you, and yet you measure yourself by their standards, their timelines, their energy, their confidence. But what if your system has been doing the best it can with what it was given? Before you try harder, try softer. Before you push forward, look around. The problem might not be your willpower, it might be your soil, because your mind, especially the unconscious, is not isolated, it's shaped. It absorbs everything around it, the moods, the energy, the silence, the stress. You're not just adapting to survive the past, you're constantly being shaped by your present. Let's talk about that. You absorb more than you realize. Not just words, but tones, silences, expectations. Even the way people look at you when you speak. Your environment doesn't just shape what you do. It shapes how you think, how you feel, and what you believe you're allowed to be. And most of it happens quietly, in the background, long before you're old enough to question it. Carl Jung called this collective conditioning. You don't choose it, you inherit it. From family, from school, from culture. If you grew up around anxiety, your nervous system adapts to chaos. If you were raised with criticism, you internalize that voice. You carry it with you, into your work, your relationships, your own mirror. If emotions were ignored or mocked, you disconnect from your feelings just to stay safe. And then one day you're an adult, and you wonder why you feel so off. Why it's hard to relax in silence. Why compliments feel suspicious. Why you apologize for things that aren't your fault. It's not because you're weak. It's because you've been conditioned to survive a psychological environment that didn't know how to hold you. This isn't abstract. It's biological. psychological, measurable. Your unconscious mind, the part of you that decides how safe it is to rest, to speak, to take up space, is always watching. And when it watches stress, control, resentment, neglect, it builds a map that says, don't trust calm, don't expect kindness, stay small, stay alert, stay useful. And then you wonder why joy feels foreign, why peace feels fake. You weren't born to mistrust good things. That was taught. The worst part, you don't even notice the conditioning while it's happening. Because it doesn't come with warning signs, it comes with smiles, routines. This is just how it is. And slowly you become someone who doesn't know if what you feel is yours, or something you absorbed years ago. You keep calling yourself the problem, when your mind is simply doing what it was trained to do. You're not defective. You were shaped. And the parts of you that you've buried, the creativity, the emotion, the boldness, they didn't disappear. They were pushed into the dark, into the shadow. And that's where we're going next. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. You think you're shy. You think you're too emotional. You think something inside you is broken. But what if none of that is true? What if the parts of you you've been trying to fix are simply the parts that were never allowed to exist? Carl Jung called it the shadow, the place inside us where we hide everything we were taught not to be. Not because we're bad, but because we adapted. We buried the pieces of ourselves that didn't fit the script. You weren't born disconnected from your confidence. You were taught it was arrogance. You weren't born ashamed of your feelings. You were taught they were weakness. You weren't born quiet. You learned that speaking had consequences. The shadow is not evil. It's not some dark, monstrous side of you. It's your creativity, your anger, your instincts, your desire, your wildness, your voice, all exiled. Because somewhere along the way you got the message. This part of me isn't welcome here. So you cut it off. You performed. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You shrank when something in you wanted to expand. And maybe people liked you more that way. Maybe they called you easygoing, mature, nice. But deep down, you knew something was missing. Something essential, something raw and alive. The truth? You are not shy. You are censored. You are not weak. You are restrained. You are not broken. You are buried. And that's why life feels so heavy, so conflicted, so numb. Because you're not just living your life, you're suppressing half of it. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Jung knew what kind of courage this takes, to look at your shadow, not with fear, but with compassion, to say, this too is me, even the parts that others found inconvenient, especially those. And when you begin to reclaim what was exiled, you don't just feel more alive. You feel more whole, less reactive, less like a mystery to yourself. But here's the thing. You can't reclaim the shadow in the same environment that made you hide it. Healing doesn't happen in the same space where the wound was created. You need room. Room to breathe. Room to be. Room to exist without filtering yourself for survival. And that's where we go next. Not to push harder, not to fight more, but to create space. You keep thinking you need more discipline, more motivation, more mental toughness. But what if what you really need is space? Space to breathe, space to feel, space to exist without having to perform every second just to feel worthy. The brain doesn't grow in toxic soil, neither does the self. You can water yourself every day, with books, with therapy, with effort, but if the ground you're rooted in is poisoned by stress, criticism, and noise, nothing can truly bloom. Carl Jung's path to healing wasn't about pushing harder. It was about individuation, becoming who you actually are beneath all the layers you had to put on just to be accepted. And that can't happen in environments that constantly ask you to betray yourself. You don't grow by forcing yourself to be different. You grow by giving yourself the kind of environment where the real you is allowed to show up. An environment that doesn't shame you for resting. That doesn't demand you explain every boundary. That doesn't make you feel like you're too much or not enough. This might mean spending more time alone, or changing the spaces you walk into, or choosing silence over noise. It might mean unfollowing people who drain you, saying no more often, creating a room, even if just in your mind, where you can finally exhale. Because healing doesn't begin with effort, it begins with safety. When you stop feeding your mind with pressure and punishment and start giving it presence, calm, curiosity, something shifts. Your nervous system softens, your inner critic gets quieter, and slowly you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. This isn't about becoming someone new, it's about returning to what's always been real, underneath the guilt, the masks, the noise. So now ask yourself, where in your life are you still trying to bloom in toxic soil? What would happen if you stopped pushing and started listening? If you stopped fighting to become and started allowing yourself to simply be? That's where the real work begins, in the spaces you choose and the silence you allow. That's where your healing waits, patiently, quietly, powerfully. If this message resonated with you, drop a comment below. I'm done surviving. I'm ready to return to myself. Not just so I know you're with me, but so you can hear yourself say it. Because sometimes a single sentence can mark the start of your return.